Tired of missing references, mangled citations, and messy drafts? Here's the time to bring order to writing academic articles. Welcome to Essential Tools for Writing the Academic Article. Hi, my name is Bogdan Popescu, and I'm an assistant professor at John Cabot University of Rome. I also used to teach at Oxford and at Princeton. And in today's video, I'm going to show you the essential tools for writing the academic article. I will demonstrate how to use Citation Manager software, and also I'll show you a template for how to write an academic article using Quarto. Stick around and we'll get right into it. In today's video, I'm going to go over JabRef, which is the main citation manager, and then Quarto, which is a word processing software that allows you to produce HTML documents, PDFs, but also Word documents at the same time. Okay, so today I would like to talk to you about essential tools for writing a paper. So I'm going to go over the bibliography manager, so the best citation software or the software that I use in my research, and then a word processing tool that's going to allow you to produce both Word documents and PDF documents. I think the most important part before we even get going is to have a clean workspace. So it's important to have a dedicated workspace that's just meant for that paper. So within that paper, it is important to have 4 important subfolders. One is data, the other one is literature, the third one is paper, and the fourth one is presentation. So having this workspace is going to give you clarity over the whole paper writing process. As you progress in the writing of the paper, you will keep accumulating, especially articles that you will add to the literature folder. So this is more or less what your workspace should look like. Before I even started any paper, this is how I think about its structure. So a folder for data, for literature, for the paper itself, and then for presentation. Okay, the reference software that I've been using for years is called JabRef. This is a free software. It's a citation manager, and it saves the literature in table-like format. Once you save all these articles, once you save the citations for these articles, you can then freely change your citation style to whatever style is necessary. For example, the American Psychological Association. So you only need a command like cite in order to use the different citation items, and I'm going to show you how. Okay, so you just go to Google, you type in JabRef, then this is the first result that's going to show up. You're going to see a website that looks like this. You need to go to the download button, and then depending on the type of machine you have, you will either choose Mac or Windows. So this is what the download section looks like for a Mac, and this is what it should look like after you install it. This is going to take probably a few minutes. Of course, I skipped this and I just took a screenshot of what the clean interface should look like. So this is what you should see on your machine as well. So the very first thing we need to do is to add a new library. We go to File, New Library, and then we start adding items. So I click on plus, and this is, for example, what the interface for an article looks like. So we have here author, title, journal, year. So let's imagine we're interested in this particular article by Alberto Simser. Does electoral manipulation discourage voter turnout? This is the title of the article. This is the journal name, and this is the author. Notice here that I'm specifically using curly brackets. So curly brackets are helpful if you're using LaTeX or the kind of word processor that I'll be using here, because this is going to maintain capitalizations. This is going to make sure that the upper caps are going to show up. So that's why this is important. So in terms of citation key, something that worked well for me that would allow me to still remember what citation I'm using, so what author I'm using, is the following format: name or last name specifically, and year. So rather than going for like citation 251, where I have to actually check what is citation 251, I go for name, year. This is always going to remind me of who the author is and what year I'm referring to. So this is your first entry. This is your first journal article. Also notice that you have these optional fields. For an academic article, you also need to have volume and page numbers. So this is what this is going to look like. Okay, so if you have to add more than one author, this is what you do. So you write the first author. So notice that it starts with last name, first name. The second author, notice the connection here. It's a comma and an and then last name and first name, and then a comma and an and, Johnson, Simon. So this is how you add a book. So you simply click on plus and you just choose book, right? So then you write here like this and just ignore the double curly brackets. One curly bracket is enough. And then you simply write the address, and this is how you get your second item in JabRef. In terms of edited volumes, this is kind of a more complicated style of citation. You simply go to others. So in others, you choose in collection. This is something that I found very helpful. So here, when you have edited volumes, you have an author. So this is the author of the chapter itself. So these are not the editors, although sometimes you might see coincidence. So the all chapter author coincides with the editor. So in this case, it kind of does. So these are the authors of the chapter. This is the name of the chapter, and this is the name of the book. Then we have a publisher, we have a year, and then we have a citation key where I follow exactly the same pattern that I suggested before. Notice here that I used the et al. Formula. So the last name of the first author, and then et ali in Latin, which means and others. And here, this is where in optional fields, I write the editor names. Okay, so this is a first library that we have that we can save. We simply click here, save library as, so this is a file, and we save it in our literature folder. Okay, so just as a reminder, this is what our book citation will look like. This is what our article citation will look like. And this is what our edited volume will look like. So the good thing about this is that once you have all these citations saved up, you simply change the citation style and you can have them in the American Psychological Association style, or you can have them in the Chicago style. So whichever style you want, this is going to do it for you. So this is what I wrote here. Once you use JabRef, you'll no longer have to worry about citation styles. Okay, this takes us to the word processing software, which is Quarto. So Quarto is an open source publishing system that's designed to create dynamic, reproducible documents, including websites, but also reports, presentations. So the good thing about Quarto, which is the reason why I switched to it, is because it allows me to render documents in HTML format, PDF, but even Word. The reason why I use Quarto, in addition to the fact that I create documents like those three, it also integrates well with R, which is a statistical software, Python, but also Julia. And this means that we can integrate chunks of code directly in the documents. So this means that we can reproduce the code in a much easier fashion. For example, we can just simply obtain a PDF that's very popular in academia that very much looks like a LaTeX document. So something that looks like this, that has a title, a subtitle, where you can put your last name, your first name, and the abstract. And then here at the bottom, you also see an email address. And then within the content itself, you could see something that looks like this. The reason why this very much resembles a LaTeX document is because, in fact, it is. So you can introduce LaTeX within Quarto as well. So you can see that you have the very specific LaTeX font that any sort of a user of LaTeX could recognize. But then in addition, the same content without changing much is represented here, an HTML document that you can subsequently upload to your website, where you have exactly the same elements: title, subtitle, author, abstract, introduction, and so on and so forth. Okay, so before we delve into that, so this was kind of an intro to what the ultimate outcome is, let us now install Quarto. So in order to install Quarto, we need two additional steps. So to install R and to install R Studio. And then I'm going to explain the basic structure of a Quarto document. So you go to this website. You can also just go to Google and search for R Studio. And within that, you first of all have to install R. So R is the programming language. R Studio is the interface. So depending on the kind of computer you have, whether it's Apple or Windows, you may have to install different versions of these softwares. So this is likely to take about 6-7 minutes, depending on your download speed. When you open it up for the first time, this is what you should see. You should see these three tabs here, which represent the console, the terminal, and background jobs. This space here has 3 or 4 tabs, so that will be the environment, history, connections. And then these 5 tabs represent files, plots, packages, help, viewer, and presentation. Quarto documents typically have a QMD extension. Quarto allows us to produce executable code blocks. It allows us to produce graphs. It allows us to produce tables, but also plain text output. So before we're able to use Quarto, it's important to install this package called R Markdown. So the way you install libraries in R is by typing install.packages and then quotes R Markdown. So we simply type it in here in the console. Notice that this is exactly the same command. And then we should see this text. So try URL. This is in the end successful. So let us now create a new Quarto document and save it in our paper folder. Remember that we have 4 subfolders within our main folder. So the way we do that is by opening a new file, a new Quarto document in particular. Let's just call it example, as I suggested here. So this is what this document is going to look like. So this is what you should see after you create a new Quarto document. You go to source because you like to switch to code, and then you delete everything that comes after the header, after Quarto. So what I do instead is type apostrophe R, and then I close it here. This is called the code chunk. This means that this is where you can run our code. I'm going to change the header from Quarto to intro, and then I'm going to type in some text like this. This is an example of text. Notice that this text is outside of the chunk, so this is outside of the apostrophes. I can save it, so I just press on save. So the floppy disk, let's say I save it here. I call it example. Now we can render the document. So I click on render, and this is what I get after I do that. So I get the name of the document, I get the header, I get the first text, and I also get the code. So once I do that, this is what our folder looks like. So within the paper folder, we have the QMD file, an HTML file, and another folder that says name of the document _ files. Okay, this is, for example, how we can add more things. For example, this is how we add comments. So comments are followed or preceded by a hashtag. This is how we run a chunk. So if we wrote the chunk correctly, we should see this play-like button that we can click, and this is what allows us to actually see the output from the chunk itself. This is how we can perform a simple mathematical operation. This is, for example, how we add a new chunk. So we imagine that you don't always have to manually type in the apostrophes and then the curly bracket, but what you could do instead is to add a new chunk manually by clicking on the green button. Then we can render the whole document. So this is what we obtain. So we have chunk number 1 that prints just a number, and then we have chunk number 2 that just does a simple addition. Okay. One of the biggest elements of a Quarto document that really controls the aesthetic of the document itself is the preamble or the YAML header. So this is a YAML header. So I changed everything that we had. So I changed the example to something like this. Title, Statistical Analysis Report. Author, this would be your name, the date, and the format. In my case, I wanted to have an HTML. I still have the header, so this is introduction, and I have the first sentence. This is an example. If you guys just delete everything and just copy and paste this, you should be able to obtain something like this. So this is what I have in mind. So I would delete everything. So press Control A or simply delete it manually until you have a clean slate, and then paste the preamble and the first sentence that you can see here. So Control A or delete, and then you can you can copy and paste the preamble that I gave you. So once you render it, this is going to allow you to see a document that looks like this. So it has a very nice title, it has an author name, it has the date when the report was published, it has a header, and it has text. Okay. Notice that if I do TOC equals true, which is TOC stands for table of contents. Once I put TOC true, as you might imagine, you actually have TOC enabled. So the table of contents is displayed here on the right. If I want to change this to something else, so notice that here I have table of contents without changing anything. If I don't like table of contents, I can change the TOC title to whatever I like. So in this case, I changed it to contents. This is how you write equations. So in order to write an inline equation, you simply type in $, and then the equation that you're interested in having. You can also add inline equations by doing the following operation. So you have here one sentence, and then you put $2. So you start off with $2 and you also end with $2. So do you see what the difference is? So when you only have one single $, you see an inline equation. If you have $2, this is where you see a centered equation. As you might imagine, there's a variety of formulas and a variety of equations that you can try to display. I encourage you to explore more of this. So I included a link to the presentation so you can explore it further. This is, for example, how you can embed code, right? So remember that this is an R chunk. This is what it looks like when you render it. So it's like a distinct section where you can actually type in code and see the output. This is, for example, what happens if you evaluate the output. So notice here that I have echo equals true and I have eval equals true. This means that I can the code, but I can also evaluate it, meaning I can perform the operation on the machine. Okay. The next step would be to try to just include code output. So let's imagine we're not interested in the code itself. What we do is just we write echo equals false and then eval equals true. So this is the case where you just want to see a table or you just want to see a graph without having the code. So by stipulating that echo is equals to false, you're going to be able to produce your article or your graph without the code. You can also imagine a situation where you just want the code but not the output. To do that, you simply write echo equals true, but then eval equals false. This is going to allow us to simply produce code but without output. Okay, one typical problem is that some packages could yield some messages like dplyr. Every single time when I run dplyr, I get this message attaching package, the following object unmasked. So this is the result of not including a specific command to the R chunk. So in order to eliminate the comments that R produces, we simply need to write message equals false. So if you write message equals false, then the annoying messages will no longer appear. Okay. So it's also important potentially, or very likely, that you have a self-contained HTML document. So a self-contained HTML document is a type of document that includes all dependencies, including images, CSS, and this is advisable because it's much easier to carry around. This type of document is easy to share without needing additional sources, and you'll also see just one single HTML document being produced. So rather than seeing this, so what you see here, where you have all these documents, the output will be something like this. So do you notice how the div underscore answers one underscore files disappeared once I embedded the resources. Well, this is what embed resources does. Okay, in terms of fonts for text, so you can obviously obtain bold text using 2 stars. You can obtain italicized text by typing in 1 single star. 3 stars correspond to a text that's both italicized and in bold. Notice also that you could maybe use code within Quarto by emphasizing the apostrophe, the beginning apostrophe, and by closing it. Okay. This is, for example, how you can write different kinds of headers. The big header is like 1 hashtag. The second header is double hashtag. The triple subheader is a triple hashtag. You can also do things like this. So notice how the header number appears both before and after. It doesn't look that great. So one solution to this is not to specify the header number. So the way to do this is by adding numbered at the end of the section. So you have dot and then unnumber. Okay. So this is also going to allow us to remove specific section headers from the table of contents. The way we do this is by adding dot unlisted. So this is going to be the effect of that. This is, for example, what we're left with after we render the document. Okay, this is how we create links. So this is a simple link to Quarto. So we have the object that appears in front of the link as a square object, and then we have the link itself. Okay, this is how we include a picture, right? So if you want this elephant, you can simply download it here. So if you click on the link, this is going to take you to that PNG. Remember that I have a graph folder in my paper folder, right? So this is where I use it. So within the graphs folder, I put the elephant, and then this is what allows me to actually visualize the elephant. Okay, itemized list. This is kind of tricky. As you can tell, it doesn't look quite the best, or at least for what I'm showing you here is okay, but I really feel that there's a lot of complications with bullet points, with subsections, to the point where I don't find it very helpful to learn these kinds of things. Tables. This is more or less what they look like. So this is a markdown table. The reason why some columns are more right aligned, left aligned, has to do, as you might imagine, with the position of the semicolon, right? So you see here that that's going to be tilted on the right, and this is going to be tilted on the left, and so on and so forth. Okay. You can also create what is called a mermaid diagram. This is essentially a theoretical diagram that allows you potentially to think more systematically about the argument in the paper. Like, what is the dependent variable? What are the independent variables? What are the main confounders? And so on and so forth. So a mermaid code looks more or less like this. So it's essentially a flow chart. Okay, you can easily embed videos in your Quarto document by simply doing this. Of course, this is not going to be visible in a PDF document, but I guess if you have a presentation, this is how we can embed a YouTube link. This is how you create notes, right? So this is a markdown syntax to indicate that probably the audience needs to pay attention to, but you also have tip, warning, caution, and important. So this means that this note is going to appear in different colors. Okay, I promised you at the beginning that you can obtain Word documents from Quarto. Before we create the Word document, we need to install something that's called Chromium, right? So if we go to terminal, this is what your terminal should look like. So it's going to be the username, $, and then I'm writing here. So within that terminal, I'm writing Quarto tools install Chromium, which is the same command as here. Once I do this, I will be able to produce Word documents. So to produce Word documents, you also need to change the preamble to this. So format docx. And then in order to create a PDF, this is where our format is going to change once again. So this is where we'll write PDF. But before we get to run a PDF, we also need to install tiny text. Okay, so let us look at the anatomy of an article. So I prepared an article template for you so you can play around with that Quarto document. This is the most simple Quarto document for writing an academic article. It even contains advice about how to do it, including how to write the abstract, how to write the introduction, how to write about methods, and so on and so forth. So if you click on this link, this is going to take you to that zip file that contains this template together with the bib file. So the bib file is the JabRef library. So what you need to do is to unzip them and then put them in your paper form. So this is more or less what your workspace should look like. Okay, if you open the paper template, you should see this, like a title, a subtitle. You should see a name, so who is writing this article, together with an email, and then the abstract, right? So it's exactly the same abstract that we saw earlier. And then the bibliography is here. So just to reiterate these basic things, so you have basic information about the paper, you have the abstract, and you have the bibliography. So once we render this, this is going to produce a PDF that looks like this, right? So this is very, very similar to an academic professional article. And then the references part is really what will allow you to produce references like this, right? So remember that I have 3 sources that I mentioned. So that is more or less it. So if you click on this link from this page, you should be able to access this Quarto document for writing an article in a zip format. But just to briefly conclude, so there are lots of options for Quarto documents, but I felt there was no concrete tutorial about how to just create the most simple article in Quarto. So hopefully I did that today. So there are many other relevant pieces of advice for how to author, how to produce computations, how to create documents, and how to do presentations. So we just went over JabRef, the citation manager, and Quarto. I hope you found this video useful. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and give it a like button, and drop me a line if you have any questions or if you have any suggestions about future videos. Thank you and see you next time.